lost it already, girls.
Aww.
All right, so we're live, right?
We can't hear you, Heather or Christine. We are live?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, apparently.
All right. Hello, everybody. We can't hear you, Heather or
They'll
like, it's fine.
They'll try to work on fixing that, and I guess the show must go on, yes?
Yes.
There's like a delay.
Is it the same link as we tweeted out earlier? Yes, for not for yes, and all right, I'll retweet that and go ahead.
There's a major delay on what we're doing.
Like between here and the YouTube channel?
That's normal.
Yeah, that's always how it is.
Like a 5-10 second delay.
Mm-hmm.
There's a major delay on the audio.
So we are going to be talking about agency and morality today. That should be fun.
Yes.
And how we view these topics differently now that we are deconverted. So,
are you guys hearing me in real time?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can hear you. We can hear you in real time. It's just
okay. I had this major delay on my audio for a second.
Do you have the YouTube channel?
Yeah, we just X'd out of it. I didn't realize it was up there.
Yeah, that might help. That's
all right.
That happened.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right, good. We're all here.
So sorry, everybody, for the technical difficulties.
Yeah, sorry, everyone. We know you were waiting with bated breath. Yeah. Everybody had the elevator music playing in their heads, right? Good, good. Okay, good. Okay, so yeah, like Jen said, today we're going to be talking about moral and bodily agency. This topic came up. I brought it up because I was thinking about just a sort of ownership of self and how we make choices with our body now that we were just directed to do before. So even if we've kept some moral agendas that we had during our Christian lives, we're now making those decisions, and a lot of those decisions are about sex and abortion and let's see, other female things, what we wear, and so I think that's where I sort of got this idea. So did any of you ladies have some first inclinations when I started talking about agency when we were discussing the topic originally?
Yeah, to me, agency, it's that sort of personal responsibility. So it kind of ties into responsibility. From what I felt like you guys were talking about, and that has to do with being responsible for, I guess, the effect you have on other people, and also kind of taking responsibility for your own life and trajectory, because there's such a sense when you're religious that there's a plan to your life, and there's a something laid out for you, and when you lose that, there's this sense that you have to figure out not only what you're going to do, but who you are, and all of that. So it becomes this really huge task. But at least for me, it was really exciting and liberating because I hadn't seen it as something I was capable of accomplishing before that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, for me, there was always a struggle of trying to figure out what God wants me to do. And that's really hard to figure out when there's not actually somebody that's telling you what to do. You're supposed to just think that the instructions are coming from God, but they come from you. So it's all confusing. I don't know how that's supposed to work. So yeah, now I'm trying to figure out how to make my own choices and have some sort of rationale other than trying to discern what God wants me to do. So it is difficult to develop that, but I think it's a better and more reliable system. So I like it.
Yeah.
Yes, I was going to add, I had a similar journey. And for me, it caused me a lot of anxiety initially. I think this loss of a sense that God is just in control of my actions and my future, because like both all of you have been saying so far, I also grew up believing that I could be kind of passive, and just I had this mentality of whatever. Well, if something doesn't go right, it's because that's the way it's supposed to be, because that's what God wants it to be. And so it was really hard. That was actually, I think, one of the things that's been the most challenging for me in my deconversion process is recognizing that life is chaotic, but also not staying in that space. So for a while I was in that that headspace, and that's also not good to just fixate too much on the fact that life is out of control, because then you feel like you don't have any power. So one of the things I've been doing recently is working on developing my own sense of agency and recognizing that I do have agency in certain contexts, while also acknowledging that life can be, there are things that happen that are unpredictable, but there are some things that I can control. So I think it's definitely a difficult process, a complicated process to go through, because all of us grew up with just such a rigid sense of the world.
Mm-hmm.
I really like what you said there, and it reminds me of Stoic philosophy, which I love. I simply
Ooh,
adore
yeah.
There are
I've heard a little bit
things
about them.
that are in our control and some things that are not in our control, and they're not in any control of any I hate to use the term skydiving. Let's just say super. Let's say that.
So what is it? I don't know what Stoic. I don't know what that is exactly.
Stoic philosophy. Well, it's a Greco-Roman philosophy. I lean toward more the Roman side, because I really don't agree with the beginning metaphysics. But anyway, yes, it's a branch of philosophy that focuses on how to live your life well, how to stay virtues and stay away from vices. Justice is a virtue. Moderation is a virtue. Things like this.
I see. That makes sense.
It's a really good philosophy in terms of morality and also agency.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember there being a TED Talk around that kind of Stoic philosophy or Stoicism that talked about gaining control over your inability to make a decision by sort of taking away the fear from it, and being able to kind of make a list and be very objective about it, and take yourself out of the situation so that you can make a good decision. And it was really interesting. It's this entire mentality that you can put into your life to make yourself more productive and fearless, really.
It's a way of life. It really is a way of a guideline for living life well. And one thing that I think is really interesting is how do I put this? The Stoics valued wisdom, and they sought a way to live one's life rationally. So you must live in terms, if you're guided by virtue instead of vices, then you're going to have the most control of your life that you can. But even still, I mean, you do have things that are out of your control, like poverty, and that you were born female or male or whatever. Those things are out of your control. But what you can do is you can control your responses to things. Now, granted, you're going to have proto-passions, as they call them. You're going to initially react to things like if something tragic happens, you're going to cry and you're going to have irrational thoughts. But after you're able to kind of examine that and step back, you can go, okay, well, what is it that what can I let go of? What can I not control and not worry about? And what can I control that I need to focus on?
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And going off what you were saying, Courtney, about like fear and how I don't know that much about Stoic philosophy, but it seems like it's a way to approach life and make decisions where you can, like Courtney, you're saying, like to look at it from an outside perspective. And I think when I was a Christian, there's such high consequences for decisions you make. Like it's not only like if I make a bad decision, it's going to be really bad for me. Like there'll be some sort of bad consequences. There's like eternal consequences for you sinning. And so you're trying to avoid sin all the time because you've been taught that it's super, super bad. And so making decisions is extremely important. And it adds so much stress. So, yeah, with decision making, I'm really glad that I can now like make a list and just remember this feels like a big deal now, but it's not. And once I get through it, it won't be. So it's okay. That's a really nice way to look at things.
Yeah. And I don't know too much about the Stoic philosophy. I kind of watched a TED Talk and it was really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for me, the sense that the world is the way that it is because we made it that way, because there is no higher power to make it any other way than what we progressed it to be. If that's the case, then we have not only a responsibility to make it better, but the capability to. And that was really empowering to me, you know. That's the point of activism and all these things, is that you're creating the world that you want to see, which is, you know, Gandhi. So it's a really kind of humanistic perspective to feel like you have the power to make your life exactly what you want it to be and to contribute to what you are passionate about and make those changes that you want to make. So that's always really exciting.
Right. And it's so different. It's just so different from how we grew up. And I think Heather talked about this, and we've all sort of mentioned it, but we were even, I want to like touch upon this depth of conviction that I felt when I was a Christian. This idea that it wasn't just that I knew these things were right. It was that I was taught to feel these things were right. And so even now, my inclination towards one side or another is swayed by that small feeling inside me. Do you know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. And so I think that depth of conviction is something that I sort of had to reevaluate later in life. Like, I still want to have conviction about things, to feel strongly about things, but that foundation comes from research and logic that I think is right, and I try to trust, scientists and people, but it's a lot. There's a lot of information out there. So rebuilding your foundation to what you think is right. When you had this subscription to what was right originally is just it's both stress inducing, but also really, really renewing in a way. And I find both really interesting. So did anyone have the same sort of strong feeling of conviction during your Christian beliefs that I did?
Yeah, I definitely did. Like I would feel like, I felt that these intuitions came from the Holy Spirit. And so sometimes I felt very strongly like God wants me to go do something, like talk to somebody. It wasn't necessarily Christian related, but like, this person needs help. I feel like I should go help them. And that was the Holy Spirit motivating me to do that. So now that I don't believe that there is a Holy Spirit, I still have these sort of like moral intuition sometimes. And sometimes it's like going to do something, or also like I feel bad or guilty about something, but I don't always know why I feel that way. And I don't trust that to guide me as much, because I don't know if it's like taught from my past and if it has like a rational basis. So I try to think through it, but sometimes that can be stressful. So I think over time, the intuitions will kind of line up with my new worldview as I construct it, but I'm still like psychologically in the other one. So Yeah.
I think two things. It creates this idea that you don't have the capacity to make your own decisions and to decide who you are and decide what you want and where you want to go and what you want to affect, because that's all supposed to be decided for you. And this whole narrative about us being kind of broken and in need of that guidance it ties right into that. But the other thing, when you step outside of that, it is really difficult to feel like you know who you are, and know where those decisions come from. So it can be really difficult to all of a sudden be without that safety net of everything's going to be fine. And I'm not going to make a wrong decision in my life because all my decisions are part of that. But when you have that mentality, it's this sense that that you're trying to figure out what the plan is. And so you're constantly reading everything, and you're reading your thoughts and you're reading your actions and your desires. And they're all part of, oh, is this what God's supposed to be telling me to do? Or is it something else? And so it's this giant guessing game on top of this feeling of, incapacity, this feeling of inferiority that you can't make that decision on your own. So damaging.
Yeah, I was gonna add to that. I felt similarly, and for me, the guessing game, a lot of it was trying to figure out what does an intuition mean outside of the Christian context. So yeah, Rachel, like what you were saying, probably all of us grew up feeling similarly that it was the Holy Spirit speaking to us, which also made things easier because then any gut feeling I had, I could immediately just say it's God speaking to me. And so what I had to do was, like you were describing, Courtney, I had to start questioning my gut feelings and trying to identify what was really going on, and then work out, because I do actually think I still have good intuition, like especially about people. But it took me a while to work out when I feel like my intuition is good and when it's, I just like want something that isn't necessarily healthy for me. So just kind of like figuring out when I should still be listening to my intuitions and when, I shouldn't be. So yeah, it's really complicated process.
Yeah, I think that intuitions are very useful, but they're unreliable. So it's always good to keep that rational mind open and think like, why am I feeling this way? What other factors could be affecting it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I feel that too. I feel very similar, and it's easier for me now because I'm not a teenager anymore. I'm not, once you sort of fall into your own as you grow older and you just live, you sort of give that, the thinking gets this background. You still are, I'm still really alive in my own mind, of course, but I'm not always thinking about like, was that kind, or yeah, it's fine. Was that kind or rude or was it immoral but recently I was thinking, because my boyfriend and I don't want another baby right now, and so I was thinking, like, what if we had a pregnancy scare? This is what mostly made me think of this, and I was like, am I okay with abortion? Because I've never been okay with it. I mean, I've understood a woman's right to choose, and I've always been sort of in that camp of like, okay, you have the right, but for me, personally, I would like, to keep the fetus or whatever as long as I can, and I sort of have approached this idea for myself. And so I'm not, please understand, like anybody who's listening, that I'm not thinking about this in a broad standpoint. I'm thinking about it for just me. So yeah. So, and then like I started going down this alley of like, well, what if there are women who did have miscarriages or not miscarriages, sorry, abortions, and then deconverted, or deconverted and then have abortions and then still feel the same things that they thought they were supposed to feel when they were Christians, you know? So they're getting these like confirmations of their feelings, even though these feelings are just, you know, innate, maybe part of us. And so I just went down this like rabbit hole of, wow, like, I own my body. I can make this decision, but now I have to reinvent, you know, where I think life begins and where I feel if I value, you know, that life over mine, and how that timeline works. Because now that there is, you know, now that I don't believe in this idea of a soul, at least not in the traditional sense, I'm taking all chance away from that child. There's no heaven. God doesn't like retrieve that fetus at whatever time. It's done. And so it's almost like there are more consequences now, but they're also less, because there's not, is it a life in the first place? And so I know I've rambled on for a little while, but I just, this is something that has approached me now, and I'm 30, and I've been deconverted for 12 years.
Yeah, those feelings run deep. They run really, really deep, and they have real life consequences. This isn't something that's just, oh, you know, I can just do whatever. No, this is a very serious life choice that you're facing. And then it's tied into those feelings of morality that you have had ingrained within you for years and years and years. Hi, Shannon. Bye, Shannon.
Yeah, but also, I mean, I think that's another thing that's kind of crippling about this religious perspective and upbringing, is that they don't give you the tools to figure out the morality behind those rules. They just give you rules. And so you don't know how to figure out how you feel about it, because you only know what's black and white. And then when you're stepped outside of that world, everything is gray, and you're like, how do I figure this out? You're not given those tools of you know, figuring out where you stand as a human being on these very human issues. It is really difficult.
It's it's really hard. Definitely
It doesn't prepare you at all.
Yeah. And I would love there to be some sort of, you know, revival in the Christian faith, where they're like, hey, you know, let's think about if you do leave the faith, because like so many of us do. You know what I mean? Like, I get it.
But Christianity is
of course
free.
they don't want to.
So.
They don't want you to. But maybe it would like open our minds a little bit and help us.
Yeah.
I don't know. I understand.
I don't think that's going to happen. Maybe like for more liberal Christians.
Well, and I think that's where the secular groups come in, of creating that community that can give you what the church didn't, in that sense. And,
yes, and we're getting community, but we're not getting moral agenda. And I understand, and there's not, and that's okay. It's not bad, because what we want to do as a secular community is accept people, because we want people to realize that there is love outside of the church, and there is hope outside of the church. So we don't want to be like, okay, well, don't, you know, but we don't believe, you know, that you shouldn't be homosexual, although many of us do think that homosexuality should be entirely accepted, right? But we also understand that there are some discomforts there, and so we want to say, you know what, I believe this, and you can believe that. But so we're not provided with that subscription that we were in the faith. And so it really is this task of digging into philosophy and reading books on happiness and morality, and listening to, you know, Christians who sort of have more of an open point of view, or non-Christians who really, you know, understand their morality. And so I think that we are building this heavily, it's just difficult. It's just a lot of research. And that's sort of, you know, this obstacle that I'm seeing now that I am thinking about this more, and I haven't gone through the, I went through this myself. I like erased my foundation of values. I was like, okay, so I start over. Do I think murder is okay? I mean, there are some cases where maybe it's okay to end a life if it's for defense, or if it's for if something happened to your children, or yourself, that was not, I mean, we can all like use our imaginations here, or don't, please. But that like that sort of revenge, like, is revenge okay now that I'm not a Christian? So that's a big one. And then, so not having that foundation of values is really difficult.
Is revenge okay?
Is revenge okay? Yeah, I mean, we could talk about this, right? We can talk about it.
I think, like, when you're a Christian, there's this idea that you have all the answers, and it's like, here, the answers, and you're like, oh, lucky me, I've got it all figured out.
There's so many subjects
And
like
then,
that. There's so many subjects. Yeah.
It seems just like a normal part of human development, like, as we learn about the world and each other, and like, life is complicated, and just like, yeah.
Yes, free will. Such a good book.
So I think it's complicated, but it's worth it to figure it out, because you can, like, there's so much more personal development that I've gone through since deconverting that I just never would have thought of before.
Yeah. You actually get an opportunity to be challenged instead of just following the guidelines that you've been given and just parroting back. Yes, 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 sir. Yes, ma'am.
Right.
Yeah. Can we talk about the free will book? I don't know.
Oh,
I don't know.
Yes.
Damn,
I'm interested.
Oh, man.
And it contains some of his actual studies that he's done as a neurologist.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's done work at UCLA, and I'm so excited about it. Like, oh my gosh.
Are you at UCLA?
What?
Is that where you are?
No, I may be in the future though, for PhD program. But yeah, I'm so excited. Okay,
Don't do it. Sorry.
So Sam Harris, he's doing like research on like deeply held beliefs over there. Really interesting stuff. The backfire effect and all kinds of things like that. So there's this podcast called You're Not So Smart podcast, and he was featured on there. I love it, right? Mrs. Snark is shaking her head like, yes. But yeah, free will. Oh my gosh, guys. It's the most, if you want to feel the most humble as a human being, that you can't take credit for being a good or bad person. It's a book about that. It's very humbling and very liberating, because
it took me to the bottom.
Yeah, and like, I'm not even finished with it, but it's like, it's so exciting because it's really just kind of driving home this idea that that you are the product of your genes, and then your experience and your influences, and there's not a lot of research suggesting that you could do anything other than what you have done in the situation you were in. That who you are and your experiences and your genes, all of that comes together. So for example, one of the biggest, controversial subjects on that would be a pedophile. Pedophiles don't, like you and I, we don't have that desire for children in that type of way. And a person who does have that, they don't control that they have that desire, and they're still personally responsible for how they behave, but it's this kind of different way of looking at human behavior, where because we're the product of that, and if you have a lot of self-reliance, or you have a lot of reliability or whatever, you can't really take credit for those things, and then if you are doing something that's harmful to other people, or harmful to yourself in some way, then it's not something that you can particularly control. But things like intervention and outside influences, you can change that and you can be that change. But in terms of figuring out why you did something the way that you did it, it's really up to your genes and your past.
Is at the core of your desire and what you want to achieve. What is the answer to that? And the answer to that is just your biology, your genes, your memories, your circumstances. And it is really
what makes you want the things that you want. Yeah.
What makes you you? These are like fundamental questions that quote unquote atheists can't answer, right?
So I'm wondering, so the book says that you don't have free will.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. So I've heard that and read that argument, and I'm actually not entirely convinced of it, even in the metaphysical sense. But I do sort of understand the idea. I mean, I've thought about personally, like the pedophile idea, you know, personally I've thought about, not myself, but you know what I mean? Like I've thought about, oh, well, you know, there are certainly people are attracted to many different kinds of people. And maybe there are people that don't have that age boundary, and there isn't much reason except for maturity for that age boundary to exist, you know, except for intellectual and bodily maturity for that age, societal age to exist, right? We choose 17, 18 because we think that is adulthood, and we treat those, you know, they've left high school essentially, and so we're like, okay, well, now that they're not in high school, they're fair game, you know. But what is really that line already, you know? And so I've thought a lot about that, you know, just how try to treat those people with love and understanding. At least, I mean, can you imagine like the person who admits, yeah, like I can't see that line, and then never acts on it because they understand the societal things. We still think they're disgusting. At least many people think they're disgusting. And so, you know, reaching out to them with love and understanding is, I think, the best thing that we can do. But some people would say no, like that they don't deserve that, even if they have never acted on that, you know. And so, yeah, it can be really tough it's a good example, but it still can be really tough for people, especially who have left the Christian faith, to come to those ideas, you know, to come to the idea, well, free will is you're just a product. You're just a sum of your parts, you know. And I mean, it's a great, I can understand the value in the concept, but
I like to enjoy the experience regardless. I mean, whether it's mine or not, I'm still having it. So I'm good enough.
Right.
Like, I think it's like Christopher Hitchens said, of course we have free will. We have no choice. So it was very difficult. I was kicking and screaming to this conclusion that I've come to, because I, for the longest time, liked the idea of empowerment and my own individual agency and free will. That was just, I was screaming it from the rooftops. I have free will. And now maybe the science doesn't indicate that, because in the science, and they've known this for years, actually, that people make your brain knows that what decision you're going to make before you make it. And they have evidence for it. So I'm just like, oh, well, I have no argument. And apparently I don't have quote unquote free will either.
But see, that's also,
it really makes you rethink also, I think, the societal standards that we have in terms of rehabilitation.
Yeah.
And how do we deal with crime and punishment? Things like that. So
yeah, this topic's very interesting to me, and I've watched a lot of YouTube about it. I haven't read Sam Harris's book, but I think I listened to his podcast episode on it, and
it was a good one.
Yeah, and it, like, okay, how our actions and behavior come out of all of the, like, you know, like with cause and effect, that relation between all the causes in like my life, from like my brain chemistry and just all of the things that have happened or whatever, the relation between the cause, all those causes, and the effect of my actions seems so complicated to me.
Yes.
And
Right.
so that's the only thing where I'm like, I think once I, like, each aspect that I think about, okay, I can see how all of these things just lead to the result. And there's like, I don't have the ability to make another choice based off of what has happened before. So I think free will not existing at the moment makes sense to me, but it does seem extremely complicated. And I can't quite conceptualize how, like, it seems too complicated for me. Like, if I think about how big the universe is and I try to think about that, it doesn't really compute as well. So it's kind of like that. But if I accept that I don't have free will, then I don't know how I can blame, or like, I don't know how anyone else's actions, including my own, can be bad or good. It's just kind of like how it happens. And
by the fact, and I guess the only objective pinnacle that you could place there is, you know, human well-being.
Right.
And that's another good book. For Sam Harris, I sound like such a fangirl. It's The Moral Landscape. I don't agree completely with Sam Harris in that particular book. I don't really, I'm not convinced that morality is objective yet. He makes that argument in that book, and it's a lot more complicated than what I'm able to convey right now. But it was a good read nonetheless, even though I didn't agree.
Do you guys know who Cosmic Skeptic is on YouTube?
Yes.
So he released a video today about his view that free will is subjective. And I thought it was very interesting because that goes against Sam Harris and another YouTuber, Rationality Rules, and other atheists. And yeah, I'm really interested in more philosophy. And I like how all of these questions are kind of up for grabs now. And I can use my brain to like figure them out and see what I think and who I agree with. And I love that. It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
that's the biggest freedom.
To express the opposite end of the free will spectrum, Christine might be interested in looking into Daniel Dennett's position on free will.
Yep.
He has some compelling arguments. They're not good enough for me, but
they might be good enough for me. Oh, nice, Jen.
I enjoy that. It's something to look at.
Oh no, I just understood
all
that.
sides of the thing, and you make an evaluation, and that's what the discovery of your own personal morals is about.
Yeah, and Cosmic Skeptic disagrees with Sam Harris on that and other issues too. So so it's not something that there's a monopoly of opinion on. But I think at least for me, there's one example that kind of illustrates what I mean by you being the product of your brain, meaning that there's things like your personality, like being a nice person. If we were to damage a certain part of your brain, then your personality would be completely different. And you could go, this has happened before where we've had a brain injury of a guy who he was a railroad worker, really nice guy. And he had a steel rod through his brain and out his eye. And it went like right through, and his name is like HM, I think is what they called him, at least in the case study. And he went from being a really nice, kind of well-mannered guy to being a very angry, just pushy, mean person. And he never went back. And so the type of person that you are and the personality that you have, it's all wrapped up in the matter of your brain. And if we change one part of it, then we can change essentially everything about who you are. And so that's a big thing that Sam Harris talks about with being like the afterlife concept, where if we change one part of your brain, it can completely change who you are. But somehow if we shut down the whole thing, then you can still be exactly who you were originally and have the same sense of consciousness and who you are. So it's
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are people that have had like traumatic brain injuries or seizures or whatever that change their entire perspective about religion, or just their entire, if it's like Phineas Gage, like the frontal lobe, it changes entire personality.
Yeah.
So,
Right. Yeah, and I read a lot about that, and I just think that some people define self separate from the brain, and I'm like, I don't. And so my brain does, in essence, have free, because even though I'm made up of choice, that my free will comes from my choices, my my biology, my genetics. Like, yes, my choice, even though it's directed, it's still those things are influencing me.
Still you.
It's okay. It's still me. And I can still, I can choose right now to stop talking.
Yeah.
It's like you kind of have your own personal will. There's no denying that you have your identity and your will and your drive, but is it free? That's the general question.
Yeah.
Could you do something that is different than what you were doing now? Could you keep talking instead of shut up? Or
I think this is the question, like, is it deterministic? Like, you have literally no control because your like idea of what you wanted to do, or like when what you just did there, would you have thought of that if you had gone back and like changed your circumstances? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
And
there's
that's
so much
the big
so
difference. Yeah.
Complicated, but
Right.
yeah, I mean,
and the definition of free will, some people define it, especially in a religious context, about whether you have the freedom to act as you wish, given some sort of outside influence, and in that context, absolutely we do. But I think in free will, in its definition in this context, is more if you could go back in time and redo what just happened, would you be capable of acting differently given the exact same point, like the exact same circumstance and the exact same brain state? That's kind of what they're talking about, is that yes, you have the free will to behave however you would like to. And so in that sense,
like to behave that way.
Yeah. So do you have the choice to decide what you want and where you want to go and what you like and what you dislike? Those things we don't decide. And so in that sense, we don't have the freedom of will to decide what our desires are. And that's kind of what I was talking about with pedophiles is, they if they could shut it off, would they be able to? So it's
It makes sense to me that free will doesn't exist, but I don't know how to live without assuming that it does.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. You have to live in accordance with, how do I respond better?
Yeah.
You have to
I don't know. I just like basically pretend that I can make choices because I don't know how else to function.
You can make choices.
Yeah, and in that sense, you do have free will. Like, you don't. Yeah, you have the freedom to make choices. It's more just that, like, behind the choices, why did you choose what you chose, and why do you like what you like? And in that sense, it doesn't change anything. This concept of you don't have free will, it doesn't change the way that you act, because yes, you have free will to choose coffee versus tea and whatever you want. But it's more asking the question, why do you choose coffee versus tea? It's more of like a, it doesn't matter in terms of your freedom as a human being to act as you wish.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, we still have this need that we're talking about originally to rebuild values, but you're the product of your past, not believing or whoever your genetics make you up, or your experiences or whatever. You evaluate those things with the sense of who you are in the past, whether it's whether it's free will or whether it's free or not. So I understand the concept, and I even understand, like, if you mapped all the particles in the universe, then you could maybe deterministically figure out your next decision, or what was going to happen in the whole earth in the next 5 minutes. And I have this argument myself that if there is any free space, then that introduces stochastics, but that's all mathematical and physics. And we
Ouch, my head.
Yeah, no, that's beyond what I'm talking. I don't know.
Yeah, it was the same thing.
Yeah.
It's just the like science and the like math behind it. And I don't know, I don't know. That stuff, I just don't know.
It's fun to talk about, though, isn't it? It's fun to contemplate, and it does do us some good. I mean, we're challenging these things rationally, and we're thinking about the science behind it, and we're having that moral discussion that for so long we haven't really been able to have. At least in my
I remember as a Christian, like feeling like I didn't, feeling like anything that I came up with in my head was part of that revelation. And so being much more careful about what do I think, why do I think it, and being able to challenge that has been such a different way of operating through the world and questioning things instead of accepting them as part of what you're what's supposed to come your way in God's plan versus, something's here and why is it there, or should I trust it or whatever. So it's a very different way of moving through the world.
Yeah, Heather, have you had any thoughts during this? Because you haven't.
Sorry.
I've just been that's great. I've just been listening. I think I tend to. So I'm also really interested in some of the science behind the way that our environment affects us. I end up in my profession, even though I'm in a literature scholar. What I end up doing a lot in class is talking about this very thing, and doing a lot of sort of more broader sociology, in my lit classes, and reminding my students that things like poverty and gender have a big impact on someone's life choices. So but I also. But the specific book that you were talking about, I have not heard of, so I wrote it down. I'm definitely interested in reading that. And another thing that is related, you guys might be interested in. Oh, I don't have it in front of me to show you, but there's a book called How Emotions Are Made, which is really interesting. So I've been reading that. If you're into neuroscience, and it seems like there's some interesting connections. It's Lisa Fieldman Barrett is her, or Barrett Fieldman. I can't remember the order of the names. But anyway, it just came out, and I heard about it on from a podcast. And it's really fascinating because it's specifically focused on the science behind our emotional responses. But she's making a similar argument that what we think of as, we think that we have control, agency in our deciding like our emotional responses. But then we also sometimes, obviously have a concept of uncontrollable emotional responses. And so she talks about how the science is headed in a direction where they think that emotional responses are not triggered by outside factors. And I'm not doing, it's really complicated. So this is like a really oversimplification, but anyway, it's just interesting. So it seems to be also interested in similar big questions that we're asking ourselves about, how much agency do we have, even in our own, what we think of as emotions. So I was going to say one other thing. Oh, yeah. And then also I was wondering with this author of Sam Harris, that's his name, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Sam Harris.
Does he talk about, I'm just curious if he talks about like cognitive behavioral therapy at all, or like how that would fit in. Because the whole idea behind CBT, this is from me going to lots of therapy myself.
I'm familiar with CBT. I graduated.
Like it's I know I was just thinking about, and again I haven't read that book, but it seems like CBT is like a counter
Yeah.
would be like a one kind of counter argument.
Like those, kind of like I was talking about the proto passions that you really have no control over. Like you were talking about emotions. You kind of, when you're able to reflect back on that, and you can train your brain after a while to think better. And that's still, it applies to this whole argument as well, because you're just working with the neural pathways that you have to work with.
Yeah.
Some people struggle more than others to get there.
But but this argument is literally because science. Like that's like, okay, free will doesn't exist because science.
Because science is a pretty rock hard.
Well, it's not the same. Like
that's fair, but it's like this semantics argument that's like kind of rooting itself in science, which is fine. I totally like. There's nothing wrong with it, but it doesn't seem like an illogical thing turned into a logical thing to me. You know what I mean? It doesn't seem like it's any big revelation. Oh, maybe I'll just read it. I'm kind
of lost, but that's okay. I had no other way to respond because it's just how I work. But yeah, it's a good book. Even if you don't agree with it, read it, because look how tiny it is. I mean, it's not going to take you very long. And there's also a lot of studies. I mean, he's very thorough with the citations, and I've looked at some of the other studies that they've done, like in the 70s and 80s, maybe the 70s, where they discovered this stuff, and they've been looking into this for a long time in neurology. And it's just kind of like I said, it's a concrete argument. I can't argue against it. I want to, but you know, I just don't have the desire. I don't know.
Not up to you anyway, so
exactly.
I do live my life, like I was saying, according to, at least morally, for the most part, from the Stoic philosophers. And the CBT is actually based on a lot of the Stoic philosophy as well. So, you know, I still live as if I have control over certain things. And some things, like my moods, for example, I can't control my moods. I'm bipolar. Some days I will wake up and want to die. And I have to look at that now, after years of looking at it, like, okay, well, I can't control how I feel. I might as well get up and do the things that I have to do to take care of myself and my family. And that's helped me. It's taken a long time. And the reason it takes a long time is because the brain has to, like, figure all this out. And I think that anybody, anywhere, is still in the process of learning. We're going to learn and change until the day we die. As far as morality, as far as agency, as far as all of this. And I think it's a beautiful thing, because I love to learn, and I look forward to learning more.
Yeah, that's another thing I've been thinking about a lot. And this is kind of a side topic, but it's sort of like sometimes I feel like an old lady, like I'm ready. I'm tired of learning, tired of growing. I'm ready to go.
So
well, no, I know. I love my child, and so I have other responsibilities I have to take care of. But sometimes I'm just like, I'm old and tired.
Yeah, and that's when you get you a lazy boy and you just watch some Netflix.
Yeah.
Watch The Handmaid's Tale on Hulu.
Ooh. Yeah.
I saw like 3 episodes, but it was a little hard for me to handle.
Yeah.
I had to stop.
You have to take it in doses, because it hurts your stomach if you watch more than like a couple episodes at a time.
Yeah.
Has anyone seen Westworld?
Yes. I haven't seen the 2nd season though. But I want
the concept of agency.
Yeah.
So interesting in that show. I'm not even like through the 1st season yet, but it's blowing my brain.
I love that show.
Yeah, me too.
Everything I agree with, like that they're presenting, but it's definitely a lot to think about, and it's really, really cool.
Yeah, like agency and personhood and morality and consequence. Really interesting. So cool.
And I love the idea in that show of the cornerstone. So for you guys who haven't watched this show, yeah. So in the robots are programmed so that they all have what their maker calls a cornerstone, which is like this memory that they had that they keep going back to. And so it also relates to what you guys are talking about with that particular book and the way that memory works. And yeah, it's fascinating. I just as a concept, and it's made me think about my own behavior, and I'll kind of, and obviously sometimes it's a joke, but I'll be like, oh, haha, that seems like maybe that's like one of my cornerstones, like this memory that I have. But yeah, it's an interesting show it definitely raises a lot of the questions we've been talking about. And obviously the characters in the show think that they do have agency, and then they go on a journey in which they realize that they don't necessarily. I don't want to. No more spoilers, I guess.
That wasn't really a spoiler. That was like conceptual. But you didn't say anything about the story.
Yeah. I'll watch it. I'll tell you if you ruined anything. I'll feel like, Heather, no.
Just watch it really fast, and then it won't spoil anything.
I'm probably the only person on the planet that likes spoilers, but
I like some. No, have you seen When Harry Met Sally, Billy Crystal?
Yeah.
Yeah, so when he says, I like reading the end of a book so that if I die, I know what happened.
Yeah.
I'm like that too. Cool. Oh, go ahead.
I find that like I get really curious about like interviews that directors and actors have around like their concepts, because if I want to get into a movie and like be excited to go see it and see if I want to see it, then if they have these like really intellectual, interesting things about the choices they made and like, the concepts that they're working with and what they thought about certain scenes, I love that. So I get so much more out of the movie when I'm like, oh, this was, all part of this concept of, other things. And, like Guillermo del Toro did Shape of Water, which is a beautiful movie. And they talk about how the set was sort of made like a painting, and all of these, like parts that were, extra little shows of diversity and of people, second-class citizens. And it's just all these subtle things that movie people, put in their films that you just get so much more out of them when you're aware of all the thought that's put into things. It's cool.
Courtney likes art.
I
art,
do.
It seems like, yeah, that's cool.
I'm nerdy.
No, we're all nerds about something.
I like being a nerd.
I'm artsy fartsy, and I'll have to check those out. I've been just spending way too much time on YouTube. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, Shape of Water. Call Me by Your Name is really good. Yeah, I'm a movie crazy person, so if you ever want to know like anything about movies, I'm your girl.
I'll know who to contact. Now, also that How Emotions Are Made book on my Goodreads list. So that.
Last year, I was really into shows, and I would binge watch so much. I think I was avoiding thinking about like school and life, and I had like I had like stress because like my beliefs and whatever. So I don't know. For the past like year now, I just haven't really been that interested. And like some things are a little triggering.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Especially lately.
Yeah. I don't know. Like I'm not as good at handling violence as I was when I was a Christian. Which is kind of weird.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Can we talk about that?
Sure.
Yes. Of course.
Do you guys find that like, I don't know if I even was old enough when I deconverted to like notice that about preferences, because I wasn't into gore ever. So yeah, I'd be curious. Like, do you think it's because of like the sense of consequences shifted or something?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen that many gory or violent things, so it's not like I've seen this consistently and I can say that it happens a lot. But I watched like Lord of the Rings with my sisters, and I don't know, just seeing people's heads get cut off and whatever, I was like, what that's a person. Like they have, I don't know. See, things just seem so much more complicated. And I don't know, like they have a family and whatever. And I know they're like a character, but I just was not, I didn't, like before, I think I was just able to like, oh, whatever, it's just a movie. But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, death is definitely more final as a non-religious person. So that concept of, you know, death is just a next step towards something else. It, I think, softens the idea of death, but then when death becomes final, it does make death
I think that I was thinking through all those things, and I'm pretty settled on that now, but that's one of the things I had to process. And so I think that was just part of my process. And maybe now I wouldn't feel as like, it wasn't that bad. Like I wasn't really triggered, but I was just uncomfortable with it. So I don't know if I would feel as uncomfortable with it now.
You can check. There's always room for another Lord of the Rings.
Marathon, girls. Marathon.
Yeah. Spicy boy, popcorn, Netflix. Just, you know, sometimes.
Yeah. I once did a Harry Potter marathon in high school. I like hosted this thing with a bunch of the kids in high school. Because I am a nerd. Yes. It was like, we did like 2 movies a day for like 4 or 5 days.
Well, one ring to rule them all.
That was a wand, I think. But, yeah.
Together.
One wand.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's actually true.
Fly over the volcano with
exactly. With the wand?
The wand.
And the 2 separate things.
Fan fiction right here.
This should be a mashup.
It should be a mashup. Fan fiction mashup. Yeah. I'm sure it's out there. You know it's out there.
Oh man.
So anyway. We're all nerds. It's okay. We're all pretty.
Yeah.
I had one. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Something that I've been thinking of for a while recently is about like choices and time. So before, when I was a Christian, I had this sense that time was unlimited. And, you know, when I got to heaven, I could just do whatever I wanted. I didn't have to manage my time. But now that I don't believe that, and now that I'm, you know, getting a little bit more responsibilities in life, I have, like, not that I really have any, but, you know, I feel like my time is limited. And that's been something that's been hard to deal with and figure out and get used to.
Yeah, as a grown-up deconvert, it doesn't go away. I've come, you know how many times I've like found peace with death? Like I found peace with death so many times because I've needed to, because it comes back and it's like, oh crap, wait, I'm gonna die. Like, and then I'm like, no, it's okay. It's like, I didn't know I was alive before I was born, so it's not gonna matter when I'm dead, so it's fine. Wait a second, I'm gonna die. This like cycle. So don't worry. It doesn't. You'll find peace with it, and then you'll like be like, oh shit, and then you'll find peace with it again.
Yeah. I think the other part of that is that sense of urgency of that you only have so much time to accomplish what you want to. Yeah. And you realize as a human being, you only get to have a certain amount of experiences and you only get to accomplish a certain amount of things, that you can't go and live 20 different lives. You have one life. And so that in that sense, you know, the sense of heaven and feeling like you can be whoever you want for the, you know, the entire course of all of history, you know, that you can, like that's kind of sad to let go of, that you have this unlimited life of experiences and accomplishments and
sort of
and I also, just to piggyback off of that, I also had a lot of anxiety, and I still struggle with this sometimes when I deconverted, because as a Christian, there's also this sense that time is unlimited, and also if you do mess up or if something happens to you that's negative, it doesn't really matter, because heaven. There's always heaven. And so I felt a lot less anxiety. I actually became initially a lot more anxious as a deconvert than I was as a Christian. And now I've worked through that. So I think I'm getting to a happy middle ground now. But for a while, that was pretty upsetting, that I had to kind of all of a sudden deal with a lot of these anxieties that I think were already latent in my personality, because I have a type A personality, which is prone to feeling anxious about the future and things. But I think that the Christianity helped to keep that in check, because I was able to just say, oh, yeah, whatever. I guess this is what God wants to happen. And so when I realized that I need to make happen whatever I want to happen
Right.
in my life, which can be really empowering, but it can also be really scary.
Yeah.
And anxiety inducing. And especially when you also have to recognize, and I had to recognize that there are some things I can't control. So, like I do have agency, but then there are things I do have to accept. But all of that I found, it's a complicated process.
One thing with the anxiety, I'm a type A personality with lots and lots and lots of anxiety. So I know exactly what you're talking about there, Heather. And one thing that does kind of bring me comfort is the thought that, well, in 5 years, is this going to matter? I made this mistake. And it kind of helps me a lot more that I'm not a theist, because I realize that no matter what mistakes I made, they're going to be gone. And I don't have to worry about it because I'm going to be gone. I know that's a strange way of looking at comfort.
Well, that's sort of just the idea that death has no regrets. And when you're dead, you just don't, there is no care. There is no, so it's fine.
Like
peace, eternal peace. It is eternal. It's the same.
Yeah.
It's eternal peace.
Did you
but it's just a different way of looking at it.
Did you about all this stuff before you were born?
Like, no, you didn't worry about it before you're born.
Yeah, so you're not going to worry about it later. So why worry about it now while you enjoy the time you have on your life and live the best you can. That's all you can do.
Right. And the more people you include with those decisions, the more you live on, kind of.
Yeah.
Who cares?
I think I'm a very type B personality. I mean, I have to look more into that, but I think all of these things, like what we've been talking about, trying to figure out God's will and not developing my own sense of agency and control, and not feeling like I can make my own choices. For me, it led to inaction. And so through university and last few years of high school and whatever, I'm pretty sure I was depressed. Like, I wasn't diagnosed or anything, but like I had no motivation to do anything. And so I think that's something that I had to develop, and I think everyone has to develop that, but I didn't think that I had to, so I delayed it for a really, really long time. So now I'm trying to figure out how to develop that, and it's coming slowly, but I think that if people don't have these ideas, like about trying to figure out what God wants you to do and not what you want to do, and all these things, they develop these skills like slowly when they're like, 15 or something. But now I'm 23 and I'm like, oh yeah, I should probably like figure out how to get what I want and, manage my time so I do things well and whatever. So yeah, but it's nice talking to you guys, because I think you guys have dealt with similar struggles, and it's nice to see that you guys are like, you can get through it.
Yeah, definitely. That's what.
Yeah,
that's what
that initial. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
That initial just that initial scare it is really daunting. But it honestly doesn't last long, especially the more that you grapple with it head on. And the more you deal with it and don't let it just kind of like sit and feel like it's going to work itself out. But these concepts of like, why, what kind of purpose can I create if there isn't a purpose for me? That sort of thing there's a kitty.
Oh,
hello, kitty.
This is named after Cara Santa Maria, so she's Kawa.
We probably, our viewers count probably went up like 5 or 6 at least.
Yeah, I know. I heard Cyrus the Skeptic yelled. It was awesome. Thanks for joining, everyone.
Thank you, sir. You're awesome. I don't care what the Iowan says. We love you.
So anyway, it seems like we've hit a lot of ideas about, it's funny because we went from, okay, so we sort of gain agency, then we lose agency, but then we still sort of have agency, but it's not, you know. So we've like entered a lot of these, you know, concepts, and I really enjoy, I think that more talks like this where we're recognizing our ownership of self, as well as the idea that we don't necessarily, we cannot control everything, and even some of our decision, or all of our decisions, are not necessarily controlled, will help people cross over, you know, to the dark side.
Sorry, a fly just like hit my face. I was like, ooh.
That's okay. That's something I said start off with you.
I was like, ooh.
And I was wondering if anybody had like any questions that they wanted to bring up, like finally, like what, like regarding maybe bodily agents, because we've talked a lot about moral agency, but not necessarily bodily agency. Like, so is there anything that sort of has changed for you in regards to what you do with your body?
I have a lot more fun with it now.
I second that, Mrs. Snarky.
I'm not worried about hell. I can do what I want with my body. And I've always been very liberal. So that with the pro-choice, I've always been pro-choice. That's just how it was kind of like you were discussing earlier, that it was like, well, I don't want to take that right away from anyone else, but I would personally choose that. Kind of, that was where I was. But now I'm a little bit more liberal on it. I could understand a lot more, especially if somebody is poverty-stricken and already has kids, why they would make that decision. And I know that it would be a difficult decision.
Yeah, well, and I just want to add that my boyfriend and I like struggled through my daughter's younger years. We just really had a hard time, and that happens with a lot of couples. And you know, it's not something I'm ashamed of, but I don't know if we could do that again. And so just sort of that idea of like, well, my life now is really valuable. Like what life am I valuing more in that instance? Like, I already have value of life. And I mean, these things are hard for me to say right now, like hard, you know, they're like hurting me because of like how ingrained that idea was in for me. But let's back up. You were saying something before that, Jen, about I'm sorry, I wanted to comment on something you just said before the bodily agency. Oh, you have fun. That's right. Yeah, fun. Yeah, and I think that's cool. I think that's it's also like, now it's not weird to get a boob job. Now it's okay to have self-esteem. Like it's okay. It's good to have self-esteem.
I can have pride in myself and my accomplishment.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I
think in terms of, oh, go ahead.
Oh no, you go, please.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think that the biggest part of abortion things for me is that the decision to have a child, I think, should be a very decisive, enthusiastic like choice. And so, you know, that decision is taken away from people sometimes. And so the biggest thing that I want to focus on with people is education and contraception and safety and these things that make those things more of a choice, and just as much as possible. And then outside of that, you know, personally, I don't know how I feel about it for me. But like Mrs. Snarky was saying, I've always been pro-choice because it's not up to me, you know. I'm not in that equation. And I feel also, I've talked about this on another channel, that if you are if you're taking like an organ or some part of your body is taken from you, you have to have consent, and it feels the same way because that's coming from you. That it has to be something that you decide that happens to your body. And so, you know, to me, it feels similar because, you know, if you take blood from someone and run tests on it, you have to have their consent. You can't just do that. You can't take something from somebody else, from their body. And yet there's this sense that society can tell women something that is so life-changing. And that isn't their decision. And it's so strange to me.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a human right. It's a basic human right.
Yeah.
And it has shown that when women have these rights, they're gonna have abortions, whether it's illegal or not. And it's in order for them to have safety, they need to have legal access to safe abortions, because it's gonna happen.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I've never definitely, even when I was a Christian, I always thought it should be like, you should be able, if you make that decision, you should be able to own that decision and be healthy about it. I just can't believe the people that stand in front of abortion clinics. Like those people are already, there's enough societal pressure that they're already going through the pain that you are assuming that they're just shrugging off.
Right.
That's quite an assumption, isn't it?
Absolutely.
When I was a Christian, I was like really pro-life. And I see what you're saying, Christine, about still having those like moral feelings about it, just because I felt, I mean, I don't know. People that I grew up with felt very, very strongly about it. But I don't know if I felt that same way. But so I haven't answered this question for myself, because it still seems to me like you're taking another human being's like chance of living a life.
Right.
So, I don't know if that question can be answered for me, like why the woman's bodily autonomy supersedes that right, then like that would answer that question for me. But I'm still kind of asking that. So
right.
Yeah.
It's not a simple thing.
Yeah.
No, and it's not, and I don't even think it has the same answer for everyone.
No.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that
there are atheists who have decided that are pro-life because especially because this is the only life we have. There are people who have decided. For me, I've decided for myself that women's rights, it just trumps it, because for me it seems like an extension of contraception, and couples deciding when they have children and when they don't. So, you know, preventing it happening in the first place is ideal. But for me, to a certain point, when it's this microscopic thing, to me it's the same. To me, it's the same as using contraception. That it wasn't there to begin with.
Yeah, you should be a slave to your biology. Like that's
says the woman who talks about free will.
I know.
Oh my
yes.
God. I'm sorry.
It seems like
I'm sorry, Jenna. I love you. I'm sorry. That was I could not. I'm sorry.
Well, no, like our desires and things like that. That's part of our biology too. And I'm not, you know, I'm just saying, like, if it doesn't correspond with what is best for our lives, and we know.
Yes. I agree with you.
You shouldn't be a slave to that. We're talking an entire lifetime of devotion to another person. And if you cannot provide a good life for this other human being, if you're in poverty, or if you're crazy and you know it, don't have the kid.
I think like I no longer believe that humans have souls. So it's not like if you end the life of this fetus that you are like, I don't know. It's just so complicated, because if you're a Christian, if you end that life, they get a whole life in heaven, which is like perfect. So it's like you're saving them pain, right?
Yeah.
But then
somebody that made that
I don't even know.
the genocide of the babies of the Amalekites, that God was just sending them to heaven. And I'm like,
yeah, I've heard that.
I had an argument with abortion about abortion with you, and you're like, This doesn't make sense.
Yeah, there is some illogical. But what you were saying, Rach, is actually interesting, and I like that question that you're asking. But what I want to ask you from another perspective, and maybe this is rhetorical, how do you want? What do you want to say to the women who have had abortions? Like, do you want to say no? Own your decision. It's okay. It just feel strong in that, Or do you want to say, it was a life, and that's so. There's sort of this other side. Like, talk to the woman who's had an abortion. Talk to the woman who is thinking about it. And what do you want her to go through? What do you want her to think? You want her to think about the best that she can do for that child, right?
Yes.
And if the best that she can do is have a complacent life about it and ruin her marriage and have, all these awful things, then maybe the best thing she could do is not to have it,
Sometimes.
And it's okay. And it's okay to have those like thoughts, and at least I think it's okay, and that's where sort of I come from.
When I was a Christian, I actually met a girl that had an abortion recently, and I was like very pro-life, but I didn't say, oh well, that was wrong. But I asked her, like, do you feel guilty about that? Because I had been taught that when you have I'd been told that when you have an abortion, you never get rid of this awful guilt, and it's just horrible. And so I was like, she was saying, like, I think this is the decision that I've made, and I'm okay with it because of this and this and this. And I didn't understand how she felt that way. But like in that moment, I didn't say, well, you're morally wrong. Like, I was just like,
of course
okay. And I just accepted what she said.
Because you have empathy. Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with you. I see what you're saying.
I think it would help a lot if women who had abortions would go through some kind of grief therapy or something. And I wanted to say hi to Shannon Q. She just joined.
Hi, Shannon.
Hi, Shannon.
Hi, guys.
Welcome.
Thanks. Sorry I'm late. Like, really late.
It happens, and this was kind of like spur of the moment. And
Heather, what were you going to say? And we'll come back to.
Oh, right. I was just going to add that I think the other side to this that we haven't really talked about is that men don't have to have this conversation. And I think that's also really important to keep in mind, because for me,
sorry, the conversation, or the like, they don't have to grapple with this personally.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah, they don't have to grapple with this personally. Right. I know men can have conversations about the ethics of an abortion, but it's not. But I think it's just interesting that we are talking about, this is a personal decision that I have to make, and am I going to feel guilty, or what are some of the potential factors, and this is something that affects us in a bodily way that doesn't affect men. And I think that's important to remember, because that's the main reason why I'm would identify as pro-choice, although I absolutely do. I also still have Christian friends who make a very articulate argument for why they personally, believe that it is a human life, and and I can respect that. But I'm definitely pro-choice, and the reason why I'm pro-choice is because I think that the choice is what gives women agency, which is what we've been talking about, to decide what their life is going to look like in the future. I mean, if you have a child, some of you in this chat have kids, and so you know that your life is fundamentally not the same, and it's never going to be the same once you've had a kid. And it can be fundamentally different in really positive ways, obviously, but it's just to say it is different. And so I think that for me, I really like knowing that I can decide if and when to have a child, if I want that kind of a life. And I'm not sure that I do. I'm pretty on the fence about having kids, because I really love my life. Honestly, I love everything about not having children and just having a cat that I just give food to once in the morning. And but I also recognize that that could change someday. So, but I just really like knowing I do feel like I have that agency. And so I've thought a lot about this question too. And I have already decided personally that I would consider having an abortion if I got pregnant right now. Now I'm also responsible and I'm taking every measure possible to prevent that. And so it's highly, highly, highly unlikely. But yeah, I've had to think about that too, and it's just interesting that I've come to some different or maybe just I've had like a different journey through that decision. But yeah, I mean, again, for right now in this moment, it would radically alter my life in a way that I don't want right now.
Yes.
But again, I just it makes me really happy knowing that I even have that sense of agency.
Yeah. Shannon, did you want to add anything since you're here? It'd be great to hear from you.
Yeah, awesome. Sorry, I've just been lying back listening. It's a really interesting conversation. It's an important one too. It's one that I've come up against on a couple of different occasions, and I personally wouldn't opt to, which is that, like you said about agency, that's my choice. If I got pregnant, I would see the pregnancy through. However, I believe fully that there should be a choice for a number of reasons. Oh gosh, something crashed. Sorry, I just heard something crash. But one of the reasons that I believe that there should be a choice is because if there isn't one, women will still pursue. They'll still pursue an abortion. They'll do it in an unsafe manner. I mean, studies show that women will go and get unsafe abortions, and that's something that nobody wants. And also, where do you draw the line, too, right? Like, there's many women who have to have abortions. Like, they have ectopic pregnancies. They have to, for their safety. They can't see that pregnancy through. So how do you screen? Like, what are your reasons for having this? Like, who's in charge of policing that sort of thing? So even if you ignore the arguments, which you shouldn't ignore, but even if the arguments of the ethical arguments that come into play, even if you don't address those, women should still have a choice. Women should still have a choice because for health reasons, so they need to be able to have control over their reproductive health. And, nobody should be screening why women are having abortions. Those are difficult conversations to have. And many women who are having them aren't having them because they want to. They're having them because it's essentially mandatory for them to continue living because they're not going to be able to carry that baby to term. But thank you for having the conversation. It's a good, important conversation to have. And thank you for inviting me on. I really appreciate you having me here.
Yeah.
We like having you. Thanks for coming.
Yes.
And I do think I think when I was wrestling with this idea, I'm glad we're having this conversation too, because I think there are a lot of women out there who don't talk about this, and it's difficult for them. And that's so far, the 5 of us and the 6 of us now have talked about things that are sort of topics that are tough for women to talk about. Maybe that this is growing, it's getting easier. We're gaining our voice. And so I'm glad for that. And so I'm just hoping that we can encourage women, especially women who've lost their faith, to open up either to us or to others about these sort of things: moral agency, bodily agency, abortion, and so I'm glad we're having these talks too. And if there are any specific ones, Shannon, you've been listening pretty consistently, if there are any specific talks that people would like, leave it in the comments or send us an email or something, because we are okay with talking about these things and we're ready and we're pretty open. And so we want there to be a stream of openness among us, and also meekness. We're all also really willing to learn too. And so that also offers a different sort of idea than we've recognized in the past, so.
We're all trying to grow together, and we're trying to excuse me, to be more inclusive and to find one another, because I know that there's a lot more deconverted women out there that feel like they have no community. And I'm glad that we're offering at least a place to where we can have these conversations. So
Definitely.
Yeah, it's even solidarity for the people that may not even be willing to join the conversation. Just having it available for people to view the conversation is really, really, really important. It's not always the people that are interacting with it that you're affecting. In a lot of ways, it's the people that are sitting in the background, not interacting. They're afraid to be seen, but they just really need to feel that sense of solidarity. So what you guys are doing is really, really important. I was one of those women who didn't recognize myself in a community that I identified with because I didn't see a lot of female voices. So I'll do anything that I can and everything that I can to help elevate female voices as much as I can. And you guys are doing such a fabulous job. I'm really, really grateful that you invited me and welcomed me here. So thank you.
Thank you for being here. And that means a lot.
It does.
You guys are awesome. Are you kidding? I'm the one who should be honored. This is fantastic. This isn't something that I've seen a lot of, and it's something that we should see more of. So kudos to you guys for doing it. And thank you for letting me be here.
Thank you. That's sweet. So does anybody have any closing things to say?
Free will's not real. I'm kidding.
I think for the abortion discussion, the two kind of driving home things for me were that, yeah, for at least for people who are pro-choice, I think it's this sense that yes, life has value, but also quality of life has value, and making sure that that human beings have the freedom to live the life that they feel is best for them. So that's something that is not often talked about in the conversation. And then the other thing is this assumption that women who have abortions haven't thought it through, or women who decide to get their tubes tied, or women who decide to, do these permanent things around birth control or giving birth, or to have more children or whatever, that these decisions are those of that person, and to assume that they have taken the decision too lightly or haven't thought these things through is an insult to their personhood. So
yeah, and even additionally,
that whenever I had my first child, I wanted to have my tubes tied. They wouldn't let me.
Really?
Yeah, wouldn't let you.
I wasn't until kid number 2 that I was able to get my tubes tied.
They said you've only had one kid, so you can't?
I was too young because I was like 26.
Oh, wow.
And I knew I couldn't handle another kid. And, and my son lives in Texas with his dad because I can't handle 2 kids. I just can't. So, and he lives very well, taken care of. I send child support, but it's like I didn't have that decision.
Right.
Yeah, and I want to add to what Courtney said. Like, if you're out there and you've had an abortion and you still feel like you're pro-life, like that's okay. Like, just understand that you are the sense of self that you have is really important. The struggles that you go through are what make you who you are, and so just recognize that it's okay to still have ownership of self and ownership of beliefs, and still have had these things in your past. It's okay. Like, and for those of you that are pro-choice, who haven't experienced, it's okay to speak up. It's okay to, talk, say things about women's rights. We're allowed to have agency. We're allowed to feel these things and feel these things strongly. And I think that's, so I agree, Courtney. And I think that's a really great point.
Yeah, we're human beings, and we all deserve to be part of this conversation because it is tough, and it isn't black and white. It isn't simple, and recognizing that is the first step to understanding each other and finding what's best as a society.
Yeah,
I think as I've been reconstructing my view on morality and my worldview and basically everything, so many things are up for debate. And it doesn't seem to me like there are set moral absolutes, like this is true 100%. It's like, oh well, I can question these things and we can talk about it and we can discuss. It doesn't have the same sort of moral gravity that it did before, and I think that's nice. Like sometimes, I don't know, it might feel like it does just because I believed that it did for so long. But yeah, I think like about abortion, like I don't know, if I was in that place of like if I had an unplanned pregnancy, I think like I would want to get an abortion, just like you were saying, Heather, like my life would be not great if I had an unplanned pregnancy right now. And so yeah, I like what all of you guys have been saying. And I agree. It's way more complicated than just like right, wrong, like black and white, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. And Rach, if you ever get in that situation, you know, just
give us all a call.
we definitely want to hear. Of course, we'll probably just confuse you about what to
disagreeing.
Well, you know what? That's another thing. I think, okay, so we've been talking about a lot of different topics. Yeah. And I think that these, like, the answers aren't going to be given to us by other people, and we aren't going to decide together what's right for everyone. We have to kind of go off on our own and think these things through and decide for ourselves. And I think that's really great. And it is very complicated and takes a long time, but I think it's worthwhile and it's part of normal human development.
Yeah, I like that I can listen to what someone has to say. And a lot of times it's something I've already considered, but sometimes I'll hear something that I hadn't thought of and it challenges me and I change my mind. And that kind of keeps me like on the level, so to speak. So I really like this stuff.
Shannon, did you have anything to add?
No. I think the discussion's fantastic. I'm sorry I missed the first part of it. I was wondering if did anybody have a discussion about, you know, consciousness and the appearance of consciousness, and, you know, early on when a fetus, well, not even a fetus, when it's, you know, zygote to blastocyst and early developmental stages, there is no prefrontal development. And I don't believe in a soul. So I think that consciousness is an emergent property of your neural chemistry. So at that point, when there's really no neural chemistry, you have to kind of grapple with the question of what is a life, right? Yeah. And what's the difference between a life and a bundle of cells? Just because it has the potential to develop into a life, that doesn't mean that it is one currently. And we don't have enough science to identify where consciousness comes from. So for somebody to give that, essentially it sounds harsh, but what's at that point a kind of a cluster of cells that's a part of your body rights that supersede your right to bodily autonomy. Right. I have difficulty grappling with that. For somebody to tell me that I have to hold it until it becomes a life because it has the potential to be a life, and that right supersedes my own. I don't, and nobody can give me a good reason as to why, other than it has the potential to be a life one day.
Okay.
So
I'll have to think more about that, because I don't. It seems like, I don't know. It seems like the right to exist supersedes somebody's right to like control their own body, but like I don't know. I'll think more about that.
The right to exist, like you mean
like to
the question would be, at what point in time do you exist?
Right. Yeah, there is a deep philosophical discussion about this. You can say, so you think, is someone their potential, or so Rachel, I think, is looking at more of like, so they have the potential to lead a life and to own their life, and so I think that anything that some people think that anything has the potential to have life, it has that life if you left it alone, right? Not like by two separate egg and sperm separately, but so there is sort of this idea of like, is there, if it could be a life, is it a life, right?
Well,
but
yeah,
Like,
But then there's freezers filled with fertilized eggs that have the potential to be alive.
Not if left alone, though, right? So there is sort of there are two. I don't agree. I'm not gonna like say which one I agree with. I don't really at this point.
No, it's just that you don't have to agree. I could change my mind. Like it's just an interesting, an important conversation, I think, to have.
Definitely the idea of consciousness is important, especially when you're talking about like just your own,
what it means to be a being.
Right. And what you believe in that. Because I think that will help you build your understanding on abortion, right? So that question comes almost first.
Comes into play.
Yeah, definitely. So my overdeveloped overdeveloped ball of zygotes needs me, and so I have to go. So I think maybe we should wrap up for the night, and then and we'll talk the first week of August if we're all around. And Shannon, you're welcome to join us, and also we can start like rotating out too, so there's that. So I just want to thank everyone in the chat for joining us. Really appreciate the views, but I mean, honestly, I'd have this discussion without the views. I love talking to you ladies, and I really appreciate you all for being here, so thank you.
No problem.
I love this so much.
All right, so good night, everyone. We will talk to you soon. Join us in a month. And we're Atheist Edge, Forsaking Faith, Mrs. Snarky, and Rach in Reality on Twitter.
I think Rachel in Reality on YouTube.
And Rachel in Reality on YouTube. Do you guys want to plug anything else?
Atheist Edge is also YouTube and like Stitcher and iTunes. Yeah.
Mrs. Snarky? Mrs. Snarky is Mrs. Snarky on YouTube.
Yeah,
right?
I'm Mrs. Snarky. So
yeah.
Everywhere.
She's always Mrs. Snarky. All right. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Oh, Shannon, are you on any platforms?
Yeah, I have a YouTube channel called Shannon Q, and on Twitter I am Shan_Q0 with 2 N's.
Okay. All right. Fantastic.
Great
All right,
Shannon. Thanks for joining us.
I love you
again.
Thanks.
I'll check them out. All right. Good night, everybody.
Night.
See you later.
Good night.